June 11th, 1962, Alcatraz Island, San Francisco Bay. 3 men vanished from the most secure prison in America. They left behind fake heads on their pillows, heads made of soap, cement dust, toilet paper, and real human hair. The guards walked past those heads all night long. They didn't notice anything wrong until the morning wake-up call. 28 years. That's how long Alcatraz had stood undefeated. No successful escapes. Not a single one. The federal government had built the prison specifically to hold the prisoners that other prisons couldn't hold. The escape artists, the troublemakers, the men who had broken out of every facility they'd ever been sent to. And for 28 years, the Rock had held them all. Until that night. How do you escape from a prison built on an island? How do you cross water so cold it can kill you in minutes? How do you fool guards who check your cell multiple times every night? And how do you disappear so completely that 60 years later, no one knows if you're alive or dead? Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary opened its doors in 1934. The location was carefully chosen, an island sitting in the middle of San Francisco Bay, approximately 1.25 miles from the nearest shore. The water temperature hovered around 53 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, even during summer, even on the warmest days. 53 degrees doesn't sound dangerous until you're in it. At that temperature, hypothermia can set in within 15 to 20 minutes. Your muscles start cramping, your body starts shutting down. Even strong swimmers lose coordination, lose the ability to keep their heads above water, lose consciousness. The prison administration understood this. They knew the water was their best security system, but they wanted more than physical barriers. They wanted psychological ones. So they created myths. Guards told incoming prisoners about the sharks, great white sharks, they said, circling the island constantly, waiting for anyone foolish enough to enter the water, get past the walls, get past the fences, and the sharks would tear you apart before you made it 100 yards. They told prisoners about the currents, powerful tidal flows that would drag you out to sea. Even if you survived the cold and the sharks, the currents would carry you miles from shore. You'd die exhausted, alone, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. They told prisoners about the guards themselves, expert marksmen, every one of them, standing orders to shoot to kill, no warning shots, no negotiations. Try to escape, and a bullet would find you before you reach the water. Most of it was lies. The sharks were real, but attacks on humans were rare. The currents were strong, but navigable if you understood them. The guards weren't all sharpshooters, and the shoot-to-kill policy was more myth than reality. But the lies worked. They created a legend, and legends are harder to escape than concrete walls. Alcatraz became known as the Rock, the prison at the end of the line, the place where America sent the criminals it never wanted to see again, the prison that no one escaped from. Al Capone did time there, the famous Chicago mob boss, the man who had built an empire on bootlegging and violence. Alcatraz broke him, reduced him to just another inmate counting days until parole. Machine Gun Kelly was there, George Barnes, his real name, one of the most notorious gangsters of the Depression era. The Rock held him too. Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, murderer, self-taught ornithologist, spent 17 years on the island. The worst criminals in America, the most dangerous men in the federal system. Alcatraz contained them all. During the 28 years the prison operated, there were 14 escape attempts. 14 times. Men tried to break free from the Rock. Some tried to swim. Some tried to build rafts. Some tried to fight their way out. One group tried to take hostages during what became known as the Battle of Alcatraz. Every single attempt failed. Men were recaptured. Men were shot. Men drowned. The record stood perfect. And then Frank Morris arrived. Frank Lee Morris was born in 1926, orphaned young, raised in foster homes, in and out of trouble from childhood. By his teenage years, He was already committing crimes. By his 20s, he had established a pattern that would define his life. Commit crime, get caught, go to prison, escape from prison, get caught again. He escaped from multiple facilities before the federal government decided enough was enough. If regular prisons couldn't hold Frank Morris, they would send him somewhere that could. Alcatraz. Morris arrived on the island in January 1960, another prisoner in a long line of prisoners, but different from most of them in one important way. Frank Morris had an IQ of 133. That number put him in the top 2% of the human population, just below the threshold that psychologists consider genius level. Smart enough to see things other people missed. Smart enough to plan ahead. Smart enough to be dangerous. In the cells near Morris were two brothers, John William Anglin and Clarence Anglin, bank robbers from Florida. They had their own history of escape attempts, their own reasons for being sent to the end of the line. And they had something Morris needed: skills, connections, and the determination to try what everyone said was impossible. There was one more man, Alan Clayton West. He would become the most important person in the story, and the most tragic. West had a job assignment that gave him access to areas other inmates couldn't reach. He cleaned the top of the cell block, the utility area above the cells where pipes and ducts ran through the building. Routine maintenance work. Nothing unusual. But one day, while West was cleaning, he noticed something. A ventilation duct that led upward, toward the roof of the building. Most of the openings in that area were sealed with solid concrete. But this one was different. It was covered only with steel bars. And those bars looked old, corroded by decades of salt air blowing in from the bay. West told Morris what he had found. Frank Morris started thinking. The ventilation duct was a way out, but getting to it meant getting out of their cells first. Each cell had a small air vent at the back, a grate about 9 inches by 6 inches, far too small for a human being to squeeze through. Unless you made it bigger. Morris examined his cell carefully. The concrete around the ventilation grate was old, weakened by time and salt exposure. The same sea air that was supposed to protect the prison from escape had actually created a vulnerability. The walls were crumbling. With the right tools and enough time, a man could dig out the concrete around that grate, widen the opening, make it big enough to crawl through. They started with spoons, metal spoons stolen from the cafeteria, crude tools, inefficient but available, night after night. They scraped at the concrete, millimeter by millimeter. The work was painfully slow, but they had nothing but time. The noise was the biggest risk. Scraping metal against concrete makes sound, and sound carries in a prison. Guards patrolled constantly. Other inmates might talk. Any unusual noise could attract attention that would end everything. But every night, the prisoners at Alcatraz were allowed to play musical instruments. 1 hour of recreation time, accordions, guitars, harmonicas. The noise was encouraged as a morale builder. Morris and his team timed their digging to match the music hour. When the instruments played, they dug. The sound of scraping disappeared beneath the sound of amateur concerts. Sometimes there was maintenance work elsewhere in the prison, hammering, drilling, construction noise. When those sounds happened, they dug then too. Progress was measured in months, not days, not weeks. Months of patient work, expanding the holes behind their beds, always careful, always paranoid, always aware that one mistake would end everything. The other inmates knew. In a prison, you can't hide activity for long. Men in nearby cells could see what was happening, could hear the scraping when the music wasn't quite loud enough, could notice the 4 men acting differently than before. According to FBI reports compiled after the escape, approximately 80 inmates eventually learned about the plan, almost half the prison population. Almost half the men on Alcatraz Island knew that Morris and the Anglins were digging their way out. Not one of them informed the guards. There's a code in prison. You don't snitch on another inmate, especially not one trying to escape. Even if you think he'll fail, even if you're not going with him, you keep your mouth shut. You help if you can. You wish him luck. One former Alcatraz inmate explained it years later in an interview. Anyone that attempted escape and wanted to escape, I'd help them all I could. That's the way a good inmate does. He helps another inmate any way he can. The inmates helped. They provided cover during cell counts. They distracted guards at crucial moments. They smuggled materials. They created diversions. It took months, but eventually, the holes were big enough. A man could squeeze through the enlarged ventilation grate and enter the utility corridor behind the cells. From there, he could climb upward, reach the area where West had found the ventilation duct, and from there, reach the roof. But reaching the roof of the prison building wasn't the same as escaping from Alcatraz. They still had to get off the island, cross 1.25 miles of freezing water, reach the mainland. They needed a boat. In the prison library, inmates had access to various magazines, popular mechanics, outdoor life publications, general reading material considered safe by the administration. In one of those magazines, they found an article about making inflatable rafts. The instructions called for rubber-coated fabric, sealed together with contact cement, vulcanized at the seams to make them airtight. Raincoats. Standard prison issue raincoats were made of rubber-coated fabric. They started collecting them, stealing them from the laundry, asking other inmates to contribute theirs, trading for them. Eventually, they accumulated 50 raincoats, enough material to construct a raft large enough to carry 3 or 4 men across the bay. But where do you build a boat inside a maximum security prison? Alan West had an idea. The utility area above the cells, the space where the ventilation duct was located, it was large enough to work in. The problem was visibility. Guards could see into that area. Anyone working up there would be spotted, unless the area was blocked from view. West approached the guards with a reasonable request. While cleaning the utility area, he said, dust constantly fell through the bars onto the cells below. Could he hang some blankets and sheets from the bars to catch the dust? Keep the cells cleaner? Make his job easier? To demonstrate the problem, West deliberately kicked up dust during his cleaning shifts, made it visible to the guards, made it seem like a genuine maintenance issue. The guards agreed. They allowed him to hang blankets and sheets across the bars. It was the single greatest security failure in Alcatraz history. The guards had just given the prisoners a completely concealed workspace, a hidden room in the middle of the most secure prison in America, a place where they could build a boat without anyone watching. The mistake was so embarrassing that it wasn't mentioned in any official report until 1990, almost 3 decades after the escape. For 2 months, the 4 men worked in their hidden workshop. They climbed up at night through the holes they had dug. They glued raincoats together to form a raft. They made life vests from the same material. They cut through the steel bars on the ventilation duct, using tools they had smuggled or improvised. But they couldn't be in the workshop and in their cells at the same time. Guards conducted multiple bed checks throughout the night. An empty bed meant an alarm, an investigation, the end of everything they had worked for. So they made dummy heads. The materials came from inside the prison. Soap provided the base. Cement dust from their digging added texture and weight. Toilet paper created shape. Paste held it together. Paint from the workshop provided color. They molded the mixture into human head shapes, painted them to look like skin, like sleeping prisoners. But fake heads need hair. Painted heads look fake without hair. Clarence Anglin worked in the prison barbershop. It was a trusted position, a privilege, and an opportunity. Every day, Clarence swept up the hair from the floor, and every day, he smuggled some of it back to his cell, little by little, week by week, until they had enough hair for all the dummy heads. When the heads were finished, they were remarkably convincing, good enough to fool a guard glancing into a dark cell at night, good enough to pass as sleeping prisoners covered by blankets, good enough to buy them the time they needed. June 11th, 1962, the night everything changed. 9:30 p.m., lights out across Alcatraz. The four men moved quickly. Each placed his dummy head on the pillow, pulled the blanket up to cover the shoulders, arranged the hair to look natural. From the corridor, it looked like four men sleeping peacefully. They opened the holes they had spent months digging, squeezed through into the utility corridor behind the cells, started climbing toward the workshop and the ventilation duct that led to freedom. But something went wrong. Alan West couldn't fit through his hole. He had sealed it after his last work session with cement. Too much cement. The material had hardened. The opening had narrowed. Now he was stuck on the wrong side of the wall, unable to squeeze through. He tried to dig it out, scraped frantically at the edges while the other three waited. Minutes passed. Each minute was a minute closer to discovery. Each minute was a guard potentially looking more closely at a dummy head. Each minute was the window of opportunity closing. The three men waited as long as they could. Then Frank Morris made the decision. They had agreed beforehand. If something happened to one of them, the others would continue. They couldn't sacrifice everyone's freedom for one man's problem. The mission came first. Morris and the Anglin brothers left Alan West behind. They climbed to the workshop, gathered the raft they had spent months building, collected the life vests, climbed through the ventilation duct to the roof of the cell block. The night air hit their faces, cold, salty, free. For the first time in years, they were outside without guards watching, without walls surrounding them, without the weight of prison pressing down. But they couldn't stop, not yet. They crossed the rooftop, moved carefully to avoid being seen by guards in the towers, reached the perimeter fence. It was chain link, not concrete. They had wire cutters. They were through in seconds. Down a pipe to the ground, across the open space to the shore. The water stretched out before them, black, cold, endless. Somewhere across that darkness lay San Francisco, lay freedom, lay the rest of their lives. They inflated the raft using a modified concertina, an accordion that Morris had converted into an air pump. It made almost no sound, just a quiet hiss as air filled the rubberized fabric. The raft held. The seams were tight. The raincoats had been assembled correctly. They pushed off from the shore of Alcatraz Island. Three men on a homemade raft, paddling into the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay. And then they vanished. 7 a.m. the next morning, the wake-up bell rang across Alcatraz. Guards began the morning count, cell by cell, inmate by inmate, standing at the bars, calling names, checking faces. They reached Frank Morris's cell, called his name once, no response. Called again, silence. A guard reached through the bars to shake the sleeping prisoner awake. The head fell off the pillow, rolled across the floor of the cell, stopped at the guard's feet. Soap, cement, toilet paper, human hair, painted eyes staring up from the concrete floor. The siren started screaming. Within minutes, every guard on Alcatraz was mobilized. The warden contacted federal authorities. FBI agents were dispatched to the island. The Coast Guard was alerted. The largest manhunt in San Francisco Bay history began. They searched the entire island first. Every building, every maintenance tunnel, every possible hiding spot. The three men were gone, completely gone. They had made it off the island. Coast Guard boats swept the bay. Helicopters circled overhead. Officers established checkpoints on the mainland. Every law enforcement agency in Northern California was on alert. They interrogated the inmates. Alan West first. His involvement was obvious. The hole in his cell, the tools in his possession. He couldn't deny being part of the plan. West talked. He had no choice. He explained how they had dug the holes, how they had built the raft, how they had made the dummy heads. But investigators believed he held back information, didn't tell them everything about where the others planned to go after reaching the mainland. The other inmates said nothing. 80 men who had known about the plan for months. Not one of them gave the FBI useful information. Days passed, then weeks. The search expanded constantly. One of the largest operations the FBI had ever conducted for escaped prisoners. They found evidence, a paddle, floating in the bay, made of the same materials the inmates had used. They found bags, waterproof bags made from raincoat material, washed up on the shore of Angel Island, north of Alcatraz. Inside the bags were personal items, photographs, letters, things that appeared to belong to the Anglin brothers, family pictures, correspondence from home, precious items that men would carry with them if they were fleeing to start new lives. The FBI used this evidence to reach a conclusion. The men had drowned. The raft had capsized in the cold water. The bags had come loose. The brothers had lost everything they were carrying as they struggled in the freezing bay. The bodies were never recovered, but bodies often aren't recovered from the bay. The currents carry them out to sea. The case was effectively closed. 3 inmates drowned during escape attempt. Except not everyone believed the official story. No bodies. That was the first problem. The currents in San Francisco Bay are strong, but bodies typically surface eventually. 3 men drowning on the same night, in the same area, and not a single corpse ever found. It seemed statistically unlikely. Then there were the other details, the strange occurrences that didn't fit the drowning theory. In 1975, 13 years after the escape, a photograph surfaced. 2 men at what appeared to be a farm in Brazil. Men who looked remarkably like John and Clarence Anglin, older, changed by time, but recognizably similar. The photograph was never verified, never proven authentic, but never definitively debunked either. It remains in FBI files as an unsolved piece of evidence. The Anglin brothers' mother reported something strange. Every year, she received flowers, anonymous delivery, no card, no return address, just bouquets appearing regularly, sent by someone who couldn't reveal their identity. The deliveries continued until her death. At her funeral, 2 tall women appeared. No one in the family recognized them. They stood in the back of the church, watched the service, and left without speaking to anyone. Some family members believed the women were actually John and Clarence, disguised, taking an enormous risk to say goodbye to the mother they could never publicly acknowledge. Then came the letter. In 2013, 51 years after the escape, a letter arrived at the FBI office in San Francisco. The writer claimed to be John Anglin, 83 years old, suffering from cancer, dying. The letter said all 3 men had survived the escape. They had made it to shore. They had started new lives. Frank Morris had died in 2008. Clarence had died in 2011. John was the last one left. He was ready to turn himself in. He wanted medical treatment for his cancer. In exchange, he would tell the truth about what happened that night in 1962. The FBI investigated the letter thoroughly. They analyzed the handwriting, tested the paper for fingerprints, examined every detail. They couldn't prove it was authentic. They couldn't prove it was fake. The case remains officially open. Over 60 years after 3 men paddled into the darkness, the FBI still considers them escaped fugitives, still maintains files on the case, still investigates new leads when they appear. 3 men, 1 raft, 1 mile and a quarter of freezing water. Did they drown in the bay? Did they make it to shore and disappear into America? Did they live for decades as free men, building new identities, starting new families, growing old while the FBI searched for corpses that never existed? We may never know for certain. What we know is this: 4 men planned the most elaborate prison escape in American history. They spent months digging through concrete with stolen spoons. They built a raft from raincoats inside a maximum security prison. They fooled guards with dummy heads made of soap and real human hair. They exploited a security failure so embarrassing that officials hid it for almost 30 years. 3 of them made it out of the building, made it to the water, made it into the darkness. One of them was left behind, Alan West, the man who started everything, the man who found the ventilation duct, the man who convinced the guards to let him hang blankets in the workshop area. He spent the rest of his sentence at Alcatraz, then other prisons. He died in 1978, a free man by then, but never an escape man. Alcatraz closed in March 1963, less than a year after the escape. The official reason was cost. Operating a prison on an island was expensive. Everything had to be shipped in: food, water, supplies. But many historians believe the escape played a role. The myth was broken. Alcatraz was supposed to be the prison no one could escape from. 3 men had just proven that was a lie. What's the point of an inescapable prison if people can escape from it? Remember the question from the beginning? How do you escape from a prison built on an island surrounded by water, so cold it can kill you? The answer is patience, planning, intelligence, teamwork, and 80 fellow prisoners who believed every man deserves a chance at freedom. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin. 3 men who beat the unbeatable prison. 3 men who walked into the water and vanished into legend. Today, tourists swim from Alcatraz Island to San Francisco regularly. Organized events, athletic challenges, thousands of people have completed the swim, proving that it was always possible, that the water could be crossed. The only thing that ever made Alcatraz inescapable was the belief that it was inescapable. 3 men stopped believing, and they became immortal.